Some days the sun shines in a special way. It doesn't just warm you, it feels like an embrace, seeping under your skin and warming your very soul. That's how our wedding day with Andrew felt. I remember every tiny detail, how I threw my head back laughing, and he looked at me as if I were his son. His grey-blue eyes, like the sky before a summer thunderstorm, shone with pure, unclouded happiness. We were young, full of plans, and so certain that a whole eternity stretched before us, all bathed in that same sunlight. We met clichely at a mutual friend's birthday party. I'd come with a friend feeling shy around strangers. He walked right up to me, handed me a glass of juice, and simply said, "Hi, I'm Andrew. You look bored." That was it. From that minute on, we were inseparable. He was the life of the party, loud, funny, always ready with a joke, and I blossomed beside him, grew braver. He listened like no one else. I could talk for hours about my dreams, opening a little flower shop, getting 2 dogs, spending a whole month by the ocean. He never interrupted, just nodded and smiled that warm, special smile of his. "We'll have it all, Helen," he'd say. "The shop, the dogs, the ocean. We'll have it." And I believed him. Every word. The first 5 years of our marriage were like a fairy tale. We worked hard, but every weekend we'd escape somewhere, foraging for mushrooms in the woods, camping by the river. He taught me to fish. I taught him to bake apple pie from an old family recipe. We built our little world, brick by brick. We bought a small apartment on the outskirts of town and fixed it up ourselves. I remember us sitting paint-splattered and exhausted on the floor of the empty living room, eating pizza straight from the box and laughing. We were happy, truly happy. We didn't need fancy resorts or luxury. We had each other. Then came the day that split our lives into before and after. Andrew went to help a friend at their cabin. Something needed fixing on the roof. I'd begged him to be careful. I'd had a bad feeling all morning. He just waved me off, kissed my forehead and said, "Don't worry, Helen, I'm not a kid." That evening the call came. A strange, frightened voice on the phone spoke words that still echo in my ears. "There's been an accident." He fell. I don't remember getting to the hospital. Everything was a blur. White walls, the smell of antiseptic, the indifferent faces of doctors. Then I saw him. My strong, vibrant Andrew lay pale and motionless in a hospital bed tangled in wires. The doctor, an older man who looked exhausted, took me aside and explained dryly, without emotion, spinal injury, very serious, almost no chance he'd walk again. In that moment, my world collapsed. The sun that had shone for me all those years simply went out. I sat by his bed holding his cold hand, unable to cry. The tears seemed frozen inside. I just stared at his face, so familiar and yet suddenly a stranger's, unable to believe this was happening to us. After 15 years of caring for my bedridden husband, I overheard him complaining to his brother that I was just free help. The first months were the hardest. Andrew sank into deep depression. He barely spoke, refused food, just lay there staring at the ceiling. I was torn between the hospital and work. I'd rush over during my lunch break to spoon-feed him. In the evenings, I'd sit by his side until late, reading to him, telling him about my day, trying to reach him somehow. He stayed silent. Sometimes I thought he didn't even hear me. Friends visited often at first, bringing fruit, trying to joke. But their visits grew fewer. Everyone has their own lives, their own worries. I didn't blame them. When he was discharged home, a new phase of our nightmare began. Our cozy apartment turned into a hospital room, a hospital bed, a wheelchair, piles of medication and equipment. I learned everything, giving injections, setting up IVs, treating bed sores, changing sheets under an immobile person. I quit my job because Andrew needed round-the-clock care. Our modest savings dwindled. I took in sewing work from home, working nights while he slept, just to scrape by. I forgot what it was like to go to the movies or meet friends. My world shrank to the size of our 2-bedroom apartment. Morning started with hygiene routines, then breakfast, meds, massage, the exercises I'd learned at the hospital, then lunch, more routines, more meds. Evenings I'd read to him or turn on the TV, day after day, year after year. 15 years, can you imagine? 15 years. In that time my friends' children grew up, some divorced, some remarried. Their lives flowed and changed. Mine stood still. I aged. Grey hair appeared, deep lines etched around my eyes. I stopped wearing makeup. For whom? I stopped buying new clothes. Why? Every penny went to Andrew's meds, his special nutrition, paying for the masseuse's rare visits. Sometimes he became unbearable. He'd yell at me over nothing. The soup wasn't hot enough, the pillow wasn't right. He could spend whole days nitpicking, and I'd silently endure it. I told myself it's hard for him. He, who'd been so active, was now completely dependent on me. His anger, his irritation, it came from helplessness. That's how I soothed myself. I told myself it was his pain screaming, not him. But there were other days when he was almost his old self. He'd tell a funny story from our past and we'd laugh together. Sometimes he'd take my hand, look into my eyes for a long time and say, "Thank you, Helen. What would I do without you?" And in those moments I forgot all the hardship. I saw the Andrew I'd married in his eyes, and it felt like it wasn't all for nothing, that my sacrifice had meaning. I loved him. Despite everything, I still loved him. I believed my love, my care, was what kept him anchored to this world. I'd buried the dream of the flower shop long ago, but I always kept African violets blooming on my windowsill. Small, delicate, they were my only reminder of that other life. Sometimes when it got too much, I'd sit by the window, look at my flowers, and cry quietly so he wouldn't hear. I cried from exhaustion, from hopelessness, from self-pity. Then I'd wipe my tears, force a smile, and go to his room to ask if he wanted tea. A few days ago, his younger brother Steve came to visit. He lives out of state and rarely visits. Usually, his visits were a small break for me. Steve could sit with Andrew for a few hours, and I could run to the store or just sit quietly in the kitchen. That day, I was in the kitchen putting the kettle on. The door to the room was slightly ajar, and I could hear them talking. They were chatting about their own things. I wasn't really listening. But suddenly Steve's voice reached me. "So how are you holding up, man? Must be tough? Helen's a saint, though. Such devotion." Then I heard Andrew's reply. His voice was quiet, but I caught every word that lashed me like a whip. "A saint?" He scoffed. "Hardly. Convenient, that's the word. She's got nowhere else to go. Who else would want her, worn out like that? This way she's got a roof over her head and some semblance of a purpose. To you, she's my wife. To me, she's free help. A maid, who feeds me, washes me, never talks back. Handy, right?" I froze, the kettle in my hand. The air vanished. I thought I'd gone deaf. I stood there, unable to move. Only one thought hammered in my head. It can't be. He couldn't have said that. I must have misheard. I leaned against the wall to keep from falling. Laughter drifted from the room. His laughter, and his brother's. Free help. Convenient. 15 years. 15 years of my life, my youth, my tears, my sleepless nights, my love. All summed up in one word. Handy. I don't remember leaving the kitchen. I think I mumbled something about going to the pharmacy. I threw on my old coat and went out. It was a cold, damp evening. I walked, not knowing where. Cars rushed past. People hurried about their business. I walked and looked at my hands. Hands that had grown rough over the years with broken nails. Hands that had washed him, fed him, massaged him. A maid's hands. In that moment something inside me snapped. That thin thread holding everything together just broke. There was no anger. No resentment, only a deafening, icy emptiness, as if my soul had been ripped out, leaving a hole where the cold autumn wind whistled through. I came home late that night. He was already asleep. I slipped quietly into my tiny room, where the old sofa I'd slept on for all these years stood. I sat on the edge, still dressed, looked out the window. There, in the darkness, was nothing. No stars, no moon. Just emptiness. The same emptiness inside me. I got up as usual the next morning, washed my face, went into his room. He woke up and looked at me with his familiar, demanding gaze. "Water?" he said. Silently, I picked up the glass, filled it, and handed it to him. My hands didn't tremble. My face was calm. I looked at him, at the man I'd given 15 years of my life to, and for the first time in all those years I felt nothing for him. No love, no pity, nothing. He drank the water, handed me the glass. "You're quiet today," he remarked. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out. I went to the kitchen, brewed myself coffee, sat by the window. My violets bloomed on the sill. I looked at them and for the first time in years thought about myself, about what I wanted, and I knew I couldn't live like this anymore. I didn't want to. The sun that had gone out 15 years ago hadn't risen. But I suddenly realized I didn't need its light anymore. I could live in the twilight. I could find my own small source of warmth. Maybe it would be just a cup of hot coffee in the morning quiet. Maybe a new book or a walk alone in the park. I didn't know. But I knew one thing for sure. I would no longer be free help. I am Helen, and my life isn't over yet. I sat in the kitchen, clutching a cup of cooling coffee. Outside, the city was waking up, but its sounds reached me as if through deep water. For the first time in 15 years, the silence in our apartment wasn't ringing or oppressive. It was mine. I just sat there, looked at my violets and breathed, deeply, evenly, like I hadn't breathed in an eternity. From the room came the familiar, demanding tinkle of the little bell I'd placed on Andrew's nightstand years ago. That sound used to make me jump up, drop everything, and run to him. My body jerked out of habit, but I forced myself to stay put. I took another small sip of the cold coffee. The bell jingled again, more insistently, with an edge of irritation. I rose slowly, rinsed my cup, and put it on the shelf. No rush. My movements were measured, almost ritualistic. I walked into the room. Andrew lay frowning, looking at me with silent reproach. Steve, curled awkwardly on a chair nearby, was dozing. "Where have you been?" Andrew grumbled irritably. "I've been ringing for half an hour. Time for my wash." Before, I'd have started apologizing, fussing, making excuses about being held up in the kitchen. But today, I just nodded silently. I got the basin of warm water, the towel, everything needed. My hands did the familiar work. I washed his face, brushed his teeth, combed his hair, but I did it silently. Inside me was an absolute ringing void, like the silence in an abandoned house. I felt no love, no pity, not even anger. I was just a function, an executor. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He was a master at sensing the slightest shift in my mood to use it against me later. "What's with you today?" he asked as I changed his shirt. "Cat got your tongue? Or did Steve say something?" I ignored his question. When I finished, I straightened his blanket and started for the kitchen to make breakfast. "Helen, I'm talking to you." His voice grew harder. I stopped in the doorway but didn't turn around. "Breakfast in 15 minutes," I said in a level tone and walked out. In the kitchen, I heard him wake his brother. Their muffled conversation reached me, but I didn't listen. I didn't care. I mechanically sliced bread, put oatmeal on to cook. For the first time, I was making breakfast not for him, but because breakfast needed to be made. The difference was colossal. I no longer poured my soul, my care, my love into these simple tasks. I was just doing a job. When I brought the tray into the room, the brothers were deep in conversation. They fell silent when they saw me. Steve looked at me guiltily, quickly averting his eyes. I set the tray on the special bedside table. "Oatmeal without sugar again?" Andrew started immediately. "I asked for?" "Sugar's on the table." I pointed to the sugar bowl. Before, I'd have added the sugar myself, stirred it, tasted it to see if it was sweet enough. He looked at me in surprise, then at his brother. Confusion flickered in his eyes. He picked up the spoon, but it trembled slightly in his weakened fingers. Usually I fed him myself so he wouldn't spill. Today I just sat on a chair in the corner and waited. He tried to eat by himself, but a few drops of oatmeal fell on the blanket. He threw down the spoon in irritation. "Well? Are you just going to sit there? Can't you see?" he almost shouted. Steve jumped up. "Andy, let me help." "No." Andrew cut him off, his eyes fixed on me. "That's what I have a wife for." "Helen." I rose slowly, took a napkin, wiped the drops off the blanket, then picked up the spoon and silently, without a word, fed him like a fussy child. His face was a mix of anger and bewilderment. He tried to catch my eye, but I looked past him, at the wall, at the pattern on the old wallpaper. When breakfast was over, I took the tray away. Steve followed me into the kitchen. "Helen," he began hesitantly, Don't take it to heart. He's sick. He doesn't know what he's saying sometimes." I turned to him. My gaze was cold and calm. "Steve." I said his name so softly he had to lean in. "What happens between me and your brother is between us. Please don't interfere." He recoiled as if I'd hit him, mumbled something like I just meant well, and retreated back to the room. I knew this was supposed to be his last day, but now it seemed he'd decided to stay. Probably sensed that something had shifted in our stagnant little swamp, where everything had been so stable and predictable. I went through my usual chores that day. Cleaning, laundry, Andrew's routines. But I did it all with the detached efficiency of a robot. I stopped telling him news I'd read online. I didn't turn on his favorite show. I didn't ask how he felt. I just did the bare minimum. The house filled with a heavy, oppressive silence. Andrew kept trying to provoke me. He was too hot, then too cold, then the pillow felt like stone. I silently fulfilled his requests and left. By evening, his patience snapped. "What the hell is going on?" he yelled when Steve went to the store. "Can you explain your behavior? Are you giving me the silent treatment?" "For what?" I was sitting in an armchair with sewing in my hands. I'd taken an urgent order, needed to hem curtains for a neighbor. I slowly put the work aside, raised my eyes to him, and for the first time that day, looked directly at him. "Nothing's going on, Andrew," I replied calmly. "I'm just tired." "Tired?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Everyone gets tired. But that's no reason to act like a stranger. You don't talk to me, you don't look at me." What happened? I stayed silent, debating whether to tell him the truth, whether to say I'd heard the words that burned everything between us to ashes. And I realized it wasn't worth it, not because I feared his reaction, but because I didn't care. Explaining anything to someone who saw you as free help was pointless. He didn't want explanations, he wanted the help back on duty. "I want to change something about our life," I said instead. He tensed. "Change what?" "Everything's already changed to the limit." "I want to find a job," I said, each word feeling like a step on thin ice over an abyss. "Not from home. A real job. A few hours a day." His face twisted. First surprise, then anger. "A job? Are you crazy? What about me? Who'll be with me? You want to leave me alone?" "I'll hire a caregiver," I answered evenly, "for the hours I'm not home. I'll earn enough for it." "A caregiver?" He choked on indignation. "You want to let a stranger into our home, to dig through my things, to boss me around in my own apartment? Never. This is my apartment too, Andrew. And I've decided. You have no right," he screamed. "I'm your husband. It's your duty to care for me. I've done my duty for 15 years. My voice didn't waver. Every day, every minute, I gave you everything I had. My youth, my dreams, my health. I have nothing left. Now I want something back. Not from you, from life. I want to feel like a person again, not a shadow by your bed." He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, as if the obedient, quiet Helen wasn't there, but a completely unfamiliar, hard, and determined woman. Fear flashed in his eyes, real, animal fear from a helpless man who suddenly realized he was losing absolute power over the person who was his entire world. He changed tactics. His voice became soft, wheedling, the voice he'd once used to talk of love. "Helen! Honey!" What are you saying? What caregiver? Why do we need strangers? If it's too hard, just tell me. We'll figure something out. Maybe Steve can come more often. I can't be without you. You know that. You're all I have. He reached his hand out to me. Before, I'd have rushed to him, grabbed his hand, kissed it, cried happy tears that he needed me. But I looked at that outstretched hand, and all I saw was the hand of the man who'd complained to his brother about his convenient wife. I didn't move. I've decided, Andrew, I repeated. Just then, Steve came back into the apartment. He walked into the room looking anxiously from me to his brother. He felt the tension hanging in the air. I'm going for a walk, I said, standing up. Where? Andrew asked fearfully. It's late, just to get some air. I walked to the entryway, put on my old coat. For the first time in years, I was leaving the house not for the pharmacy or groceries. I was leaving just for me, for myself. Helen, don't go, please. Andrew's desperate cry followed me from the room. I froze at the door for a second. Some part of me, the part that had lived on inertia all these years, wanted to go back, soothe him, say everything would be as before. But I fought the urge. I opened the door and stepped onto the landing. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting me off from my past life. I walked down the stairs, and with each step it became easier to breathe. I stepped outside. Cool evening air hit my face. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked forward, past glowing windows, past people rushing somewhere. I walked, and for the first time in 15 years I felt solid ground under my feet, my own road, and though I didn't know yet where it would lead, I was sure of one thing. I would never turn aside from it again to become anyone's shadow. Lost in thought, walking the evening streets, my feet carried me to our old park. The very one where, on a bench under a spreading maple, Andrew had first awkwardly taken my hand. I sat on that same bench. How many years had passed? 16? 17? A whole lifetime. Back then, in that distant past, I'd looked at the world with wide eyes full of naive faith in eternal happiness. Now I looked at my hands resting on my knees. The hands of a tired, grown woman who had just realized eternity didn't exist, and happiness wasn't a gift, but daily, sometimes exhausting work. I didn't regret the past. No, there had been bright, joyful moments I would treasure, but now I understood clearly I couldn't live on memories alone. The wall I'd built around Andrew and me had crumbled, and I suddenly saw there was a whole world beyond it. It lived, breathed, bustled, and I desperately wanted to be part of it. I thought about work. What could I do? My hands remembered sewing, but it brought pennies and stole my nights. Before marriage, I'd worked as a secretary at a small firm. Those skills were probably outdated. Computers, new software. I knew none of it. Fear pricked my heart like a thin, icy needle. Who would want me? A woman over 40, no work experience for 15 years, with tired eyes and deep lines. But then I remembered my dream. The flower shop. That thought had always warmed me on the darkest days. Of course, opening my own place was out of the question now. That took money I didn't have. But what if? What if I tried to get a job at a flower shop? Just as a salesperson, handling flowers, making bouquets, breathing in their scent. The thought felt like salvation. It was something real, something for the soul. My tiny beacon in a thick fog of uncertainty. I sat on the bench until I got thoroughly chilled. Time to go back to the apartment that had stopped being my home and become a battlefield. But now I knew what I was fighting for. I was fighting for myself. When I quietly opened the front door, I knew immediately they weren't asleep. Muffled voices came from the room. I took off my coat and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. A minute later, Steve appeared in the doorway. He looked haggard. "Helen," he began, genuine pleading in his voice. "Come back, he's going crazy." His blood pressure shot up. I barely calmed him down. "He's calling for you." I silently looked at him. In his eyes I saw not just concern for his brother, but fear that the familiar established order was crumbling, and he, Steve, would have to get involved. And he didn't want that. He wanted, as before, to visit once a year, sit by his sick brother's bed, cluck his tongue sympathetically at the saintly sister-in-law, and go back to his own calm, comfortable life. "I'll be right there," I said quietly. I walked into the room. Andrew lay with his eyes closed, but I knew he wasn't asleep. A blood pressure monitor lay discarded on the nightstand. "You came back," he said without opening his eyes. His voice held no anger, no joy, only a deep, endless weariness. "I didn't go anywhere," I replied, walking to the bed. "I just went for some air." I adjusted his pillow, tucked in the blanket. My touch was habitually gentle, but there was no soul in it anymore. He felt it. He opened his eyes and looked at me, long, searchingly. "You're still angry," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I'm not angry, Andrew. I'm just different. You don't love me anymore," he whispered, and for the first time in hours I heard not feigned self-pity, but real, genuine fear in his voice. What could I say? Say, "Yes, I don't love you"? That would be too cruel. Say, "I love you"? That would be a lie. "Let's sleep," I said, evading the answer. "Tomorrow's a hard day." He didn't answer, just turned to face the wall. Steve, who'd been standing in the doorway the whole time, quietly left. I went to my little room and, for the first time in years, fell asleep almost immediately without long, torturous thoughts. The morning began with silence. It was so thick you could almost touch it. I did all the necessary routines, made breakfast. Andrew ate silently, not looking at me. Steve sat at the table, nervously stirring his spoon in his cup, also silent. The atmosphere was unbearable. After breakfast, as I'd decided yesterday, I sat down at the old laptop we'd bought before Andrew got sick. I turned it on, waited for it to boot up, and started searching. Florist job. Floral assistant wanted. There weren't many listings, and almost all required experience, but I found a few marked training possible. I wrote down addresses and phone numbers on a scrap of paper. Andrew's voice came from the room. "Steve, come here." I heard their muffled whispering. Then Steve came out, again with that guilty look. "Helen, my brother he wants to talk to you, just calmly." I sighed and went into the room. Andrew looked at me. His gaze held none of yesterday's anger. There was a new, calculating coldness. "I thought all night," he began in an even voice. "I understand. You have a right to your own life." I was selfish. Forgive me. I was stunned. I hadn't expected this. I'd expected yelling, accusations, manipulation, not an apology. "If you want to work, he continued. "I won't stop you. But I have one condition." I braced myself, waiting for the catch. "No caregivers," he said firmly. "I won't have a stranger in my house." "Steve?" He talked to his wife. "He's willing to stay here for a while. Help me while you're gone. Then we'll figure something out. Maybe I can manage alone for a couple of hours. You won't be gone all day, right?" He looked at me hopefully. Steve, standing nearby, nodded vigorously. It was unexpected, and very much like Andrew. He'd realized a direct attack wouldn't work, so he'd opted for cunning. He was offering a compromise that, on the surface, looked perfect. I got my job. He avoided the threat of a stranger, but I knew it was a trap. Steve couldn't stay forever. Sooner or later, he'd have to leave. And then I'd be back in the same cage, and he'd say, "See, it didn't work. Let's go back to how it was." But I was so tired of fighting, so tired of the tension, and I thought, maybe this is a way out, at least temporarily. I could find a job, get my bearings, stand on my own feet. Then we'd see. "Okay," I said, "I agree." Andrew exhaled with relief. Something like a smile even touched his lips. Steve looked pleased too. The crisis was averted. That same day I started calling the numbers. Polite responses, but as soon as they heard I had no experience, interest faded. By evening I was exhausted and almost despairing. One last number. A little shop on the other side of town called Floral Enchantment. A pleasant female voice answered. Hopelessness already in my voice, I started my rehearsed spiel. "Hello, I'm calling about the ad." No experience, but I love flowers, and I learn fast. "Come in tomorrow," the woman said unexpectedly. "We'll talk. My name is Mrs. Peterson." The next day, leaving Andrew in Steve's care, I went to the interview. I put on my one decent dress, hanging unworn in the closet for years. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. A stranger with anxious eyes stood there. Floral Enchantment was a tiny but incredibly cozy shop. Inside, it smelled of greenery, damp earth, and hundreds of different flowers. Behind the counter stood an older woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a mass of pure white hair pulled back in a bun. This was Mrs. Peterson. She didn't ask much about work. She asked about my life. To my own surprise, I told her everything, well, almost everything. About my love for flowers, the violets on my sill, the dream. About my husband, I only said he was ill and needed care. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "You know, dear, floristry isn't just making bouquets. Flowers, they're alive. They feel everything. They need soul. And I see your soul is bruised. But it's alive. That's the main thing. Start your trial tomorrow. We'll see what you can do." I walked out of the shop, not believing my luck. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. I'd gotten a chance. A small one, but so important to me. The first days were incredibly hard. I mixed up flower names, trimmed them wrong, fumbled with wrapping paper. My hands, unused to this work, were clumsy. Mrs. Peterson patiently taught me everything, sometimes grumbling good-naturedly, but never scolding, and I soaked it up like a sponge. I came home late each evening, tired but happy. The scent of flowers seemed embedded in my skin and hair. I brought home slightly wilted, unsellable blooms and put them in a vase on the kitchen table. Our grey apartment began to come alive, little by little. Andrew behaved surprisingly calmly. He asked about my work, about Mrs. Peterson. Sometimes I even thought he was glad for me. Steve dutifully played the caregiver role, but I could see it weighed on him. He called home to his wife more often, homesickness in his voice. A week passed. One evening when I got home, Steve met me in the hallway. "Helen, I need to leave," he said guiltily. "My wife's having problems at work. My daughter's sick." "I can't stay longer. I've got a ticket for tomorrow." My heart plummeted. There it was. The trap was springing shut. I nodded silently. I went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. Thoughts raced feverishly. What to do? Quit? Go back to the cage? No, not that. I walked into the room. Andrew already knew. He looked at me with poorly concealed triumph. "Well, that's that, Helen," he said softly. "Didn't work out. It's okay. You had a little break. That's enough. Home is your real job." He expected me to cry now, to agree, to give in, like always. But I looked at him calmly and firmly. "No, Andrew, I'm not quitting. But how?" He was genuinely surprised. "Who will be with me?" "I found a caregiver," I said. And it was true. I'd known this day would come and had secretly called several agencies. I'd arranged with one woman, Mary Johnson, that I'd call when needed. Her name is Mary Johnson. She'll be here tomorrow morning. Andrew's face twisted with rage. He saw his plan had failed, that I'd outmaneuvered him. "I won't let her in," he screamed. "I don't want to see anyone here. It's not up for discussion, Andrew. Part of my salary will pay for her." "I've decided." He started yelling, insulting me, calling me a traitor. Steve tried to calm him, uselessly. I didn't listen. I turned and walked out of the room. I sat in the kitchen, among my wilting flowers, and covered my ears. I knew a real war lay ahead, but I also knew I had the strength to endure it, because now I was fighting not for him, but for myself. For my right to breathe, to live, to be happy. The night after Steve left was restless. I barely slept, listening to every sound from Andrew's room. He wasn't sleeping either. I heard his heavy, ragged breathing, the creak of the bed as he tossed and turned. We were both in our trenches, waiting for dawn to start a new battle in our long war. He waited for me to break, to back down, to call this unknown Mary Johnson and cancel. I waited to see if I had the strength not to. In the morning I got up exhausted but resolute. The silence in the apartment was thick and sticky like molasses. I went into Andrew. He lay facing the wall, his whole posture declaring I didn't exist for him. I performed the morning routines with the detached efficiency of a surgeon. No word of reproach, no questions. He didn't utter a sound, not even when I, a bit hesitantly, started feeding him breakfast. He just ate, staring at the wall. This was his new weapon, contemptuous silence. At exactly 9, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. I opened the door. A woman, probably in her late 50s, stood there, sturdy, of medium height, with a short crop of grey hair and remarkably calm, clear eyes. She wore simple, neat clothes. She radiated not servile fussiness, but steadiness and confidence. Mary Johnson, she introduced herself, her voice as calm and steady as her presence. "Helen," I said, offering my hand. "Please come in." I led her to the room. Andrew didn't stir. "Andrew," I said as evenly as I could, "this is Mary Johnson. She'll help you while I'm at work." Silence. His back radiated hostility. Mary Johnson didn't seem fazed. She scanned the room with a professional eye, noting the shelf of medicines, the bedside table. She didn't look at Andrew as a poor invalid. She looked at him as her job. "Is there a medication schedule?" she asked matter-of-factly. "Yes, here on the wall." "Blood pressure?" "How many times a day?" "Twice, morning and evening." "Extra if he complains." "Got it. Diet. Any restrictions?" I started explaining the intricacies of our routine, his habits and quirks, quickly, stumbling over words. Mary Johnson listened, nodding, her calmness seeping into me. I knew I'd made the right choice. This woman wouldn't be pushed around. "I have to go," I said, glancing at my watch. "I'll be late for work." I walked to the door, turned for a second. Andrew still lay turned away. Mary Johnson took a book out of her bag and sat in the armchair in the corner. She wasn't going to fawn or try to win him over. She was simply there, ready to do her job and wait. That step, crossing the threshold of my own apartment, was incredibly hard. I felt like a traitor abandoning a helpless person. Old deep-rooted reflexes screamed that I should go back, but I forced myself to close the door and hurry down the stairs, almost running. All day at the flower shop, I was on pins and needles. What was happening? Had Andrew thrown a fit? Had he kicked Mary Johnson out? I almost called several times, but stopped myself. I had to trust my decision, and trust that calm, confident woman. Mrs. Peterson, my boss, saw my state. "Not all here today, Helen?" she asked kindly. "Mind at home? Body here?" I nodded, unable to explain. "Here." She pushed a huge box of roses towards me. "Prep them for sale. Strip the leaves, recut the stems. And don't think, just work with your hands. Sometimes that's the best medicine for the mind." And she was right. The monotonous, meticulous work gradually calmed me. I took a cool, firm stem in my hands, carefully removed thorns and excess leaves, recut it under water. The scent of roses enveloped me, filled my lungs, and the anxiety slowly receded. By the end of the day, I could focus on making simple bouquets. I even managed to sell one to a young, smiling couple. When Mrs. Peterson handed me an envelope with my first week's pay, I couldn't believe my eyes. The sum was modest, but to me it was a fortune. I held the bills, my fingers trembling. This was my money. Not his pension, not disability payments, but my own, earned money. I felt like I'd conquered Everest. I flew home on wings, but the closer I got to my door, the stronger the anxiety grew. I braced for the worst, yelling, broken dishes, Mary Johnson storming out. But the apartment was quiet. Mary Johnson was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea. "Good evening, Helen," she said as calmly as if she'd spent the day at a spa. "Not with my husband. Right on time. My shift's just ending." "How did it go?" I breathed out, dreading the answer. Mary Johnson took a sip of tea and began her report. She spoke dryly, emotionlessly, like a newscaster reading the weather. At 9:30, the patient refused his mid-morning snack. I left it on the table. He ate it at 10:15. At 11, he demanded I turn off the TV, which was not on. I informed him the TV was off. At noon, he refused his medication. I advised him I would note his refusal in the care log. 5 minutes later, he requested his medication. Lunch proceeded without incident. After lunch, he referred to me as his jail warden. I clarified that my name is Mary Johnson. At 4, he requested I read the newspaper. I read him the front page and the sports section. I listened, mouth open. It was incredible. All the manipulations Andrew had honed on me for years, all his tantrums and attempts to unbalance me, they all shattered against the icy calm of this woman. She didn't play his games. She just followed the instructions. I walked into the room. Andrew lay with his eyes closed, pretending to sleep. I knew this trick. I paid Mary Johnson, thanked her, and arranged for the next day. As the door closed behind her, Andrew instantly woke up. "Finally, that harpy is gone," he hissed. "Do you realize who you brought into our home? She's not a caregiver. She's Cerberus. She tormented me all day." He clearly expected me to rush to comfort him, apologize, promise it wouldn't happen again, but I just looked at him silently. "Did she give you your meds?" I asked. "She did." He lowered his tone slightly. "But how? With a look like I was begging for charity. Did she feed you lunch?" "She fed me." "But it wasn't food, it was poison. Did she read you the paper?" He fell silent, seeing where I was going. "Andrew," I said wearily, "Mary Johnson is a professional. She's not my friend or your nursemaid. She does her job, and she'll be here every day while I work. This is our new reality. Get used to it." I turned and went to the kitchen to make dinner. I heard him yelling things at my back, calling me heartless, saying I'd traded him for my stinking flowers. I didn't answer. So began our new life. Days turned into routine. Mornings I left for work, leaving Andrew with Mary Johnson. Evenings I'd return, hear the caregiver's brief report and a litany of complaints from my husband. But gradually the complaints grew shorter, less emotional. Andrew realized his one-man show no longer had a sympathetic audience. Mary Johnson was unflappable, and I had changed. Working at the flower shop became my lifeline. I discovered a talent I never knew I had. Turns out I had an eye for color and form. Mrs. Peterson trusted me more, and soon I was creating complex arrangements myself. People bought my bouquets, thanked me, smiled. I felt needed, useful, alive. I bought myself a bright blue dress on sale. When I wore it to work for the first time, I stared at my reflection. A nearly unfamiliar woman looked back, still tired but with a spark in her eyes. For the first time in years, I smiled at myself. Andrew noticed the changes too. He saw me come home smelling of flowers, a slight smile on my lips. He saw me place a vase of unsellable blooms on the kitchen table, turning our dreary apartment into a little oasis. And in his eyes I saw an expression I hadn't seen before, a mix of envy, bewilderment, and loneliness. He was cut off from this new world of mine. One evening I brought home a single, incredibly beautiful tea rose. It was the last one left, and Mrs. Peterson said I could have it. I put it in a slender glass vase on the kitchen table. When I went into the room to give Andrew his evening meds, he looked at me with his usual sullen expression. "What? Got an admirer already?" he asked nastily. "Sending you flowers?" Before, I'd have been hurt, started defending myself. But now I just smiled slightly. "I bought it for myself," I said quietly. "Just because. Today was a good day. I made a beautiful bouquet for a lovely elderly couple. They said I had talent. I said it without challenge, without wanting to sting him. I was just sharing a small joy." He was silent for a long time, looking away. I was about to leave when he spoke so softly I barely heard. "Show me. I didn't understand at first." "Show you what?" "The rose," he said, still not looking at me. I went to the kitchen, brought back the vase, and set it on his bedside table. He slowly turned his head. He looked long at the delicate creamy petals edged in pink. He looked at the flower that was a symbol of my new life, separate from him. Silence filled the room, and in that silence I suddenly felt something shift, something fragile, barely perceptible. "Pretty," he whispered. That single word held no poison, no sarcasm, no self-pity. It was just a simple statement of fact. He saw beauty, and he acknowledged it. I didn't answer. I just left the rose standing by his bed and quietly walked out. My heart wasn't filled with triumphant glee, only a quiet, luminous sadness and a tiny seed of hope. Hope that maybe someday he could see not just the flower. Maybe he could see me again, not the help, not the caregiver. Helen. The rose stood on the bedside table for 3 days, 3 days of almost complete silence. But it was a different silence now, not hostile, not icy, more thoughtful, filled with unspoken questions. I cared for Andrew. Mary Johnson came and went. I rushed to my job, came home tired but feeling more alive each day. And the rose stood between us, a silent mediator. Andrew no longer turned to the wall. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and I often caught his gaze drifting to the flower. When the petals started to wilt and darken at the edges, I silently took the vase to throw the flower away as I came home from work. "Wait," he said softly. I froze in the doorway. "Leave it," he asked. I came back and put the vase back on the table. He said nothing more, but I understood. He didn't want to let go of this fragile symbol of something new, something timidly tiptoeing into our apartment. The next day I brought home a small sprig of baby's breath, a cloud of tiny white stars. I removed the wilted rose and put the sprig in its place. Andrew watched my movements, and I saw no reproach, no sarcasm in his eyes, only quiet, focused observation. So began a new tradition. Every day I brought home a single flower or sprig from work and put it in the vase by his bed. It became our unspoken language, a way to say things we couldn't yet find words for. Andrew's relationship with Mary Johnson changed subtly, too. He stopped outright fighting her. His passive aggression gave way to something like curiosity. Once, coming home, I found them talking. Well, mostly she was talking. "And my granddaughter Annie started first grade," Mary Johnson was saying in her steady, calm voice as she changed her shoes in the hallway. "She's gotten so serious. Says, 'Grandma, I have a job now too, only they don't pay me. They give me grades.'" I saw a shadow of a smile touch Andrew's lips. He was listening to her. He, who'd called her his jail warden, was listening to stories about her family. Mary Johnson, unknowingly, was opening a window for him into the world that existed beyond our apartment. A world with children, schools, simple human worries. My life wasn't standing still either. Mrs. Peterson, seeing my dedication, gave me increasingly complex tasks. One day she said, "Helen, next week there's a wedding for some lovely people. Big order. Need to decorate the banquet hall. A floral arch. Centerpieces. I'll be lead, but I need an assistant. Good hands and a head. I want it to be you." My breath caught. "Me? Decorate a whole wedding? Me? Who a month ago couldn't tell a freesia from a lysianthus?" "I can't do it, Mrs. Peterson," I stammered in panic. "You can," she said firmly. "The eyes fear it, but the hands do it. You have the talent. You have the soul. I'll teach you the rest. We prepared all week. Mrs. Peterson sketched designs, taught me how to secure flowers, combine colors, create volume. I absorbed it all, forgetting sleep and food. I came home so exhausted in the evenings I had no energy even for Andrew's complaints. I mechanically did my duties, all my thoughts back among the sketches, ribbons, and mountains of flowers we'd ordered. Andrew sensed my distance. "Daydreaming again?" he asked one evening when I almost mixed up his pills. "What kind of job is it, that you'll soon forget your own husband?" And instead of staying silent or snapping back, I suddenly sat in the armchair and started telling him. I told him about the order, the arch, the flowers we'd chosen, white hydrangeas, soft pink peonies, eucalyptus. I spoke haltingly, passionately, like I used to long ago, at the very beginning of our life, sharing my dreams. He listened silently, not interrupting. I didn't know what he was thinking. Maybe angry I was engrossed in something that had nothing to do with him. When I finished, I got up to leave. "Why eucalyptus?" he suddenly asked. I froze. It wasn't rhetorical, not a dig. It was a genuine question. It adds lightness," I answered, flustered. "And it has this subtle, tangy scent. It balances the sweetness of the flowers, creates balance." He nodded, as if considering my words. Balance, he repeated quietly, as if tasting the word. On the wedding day, I left home early, full of fear and excitement. Mrs. Peterson and I worked in the banquet hall for hours without straightening up. My hands were scratched by thorns, my fingers ached from wire, but I didn't feel it. I watched a miracle unfold before my eyes. How an empty, bland hall transformed into a fairy tale garden. The arch turned out exactly as we'd envisioned, light, airy, magical. When we finished, I stepped back and looked at our work. I felt such pride, such overwhelming happiness that tears welled up. I did this, me, Helen, the former shadow, the former help. That evening, utterly drained but elated, I went straight to Andrew's room. I wanted to share it with him, tell him how it went, but he was asleep. And on the bedside table, next to the vase, lay a sheet of paper torn from a notepad. On it, in shaky, tremulous handwriting I hadn't seen in 15 years, was written one word: proud. I sank into the armchair and cried. But these weren't tears of hurt or self-pity like before. They were tears of release and cleansing, tears washing away 15 years of pain. I realized our war was over. It hadn't ended with victory or defeat. It had simply run its course. I didn't know what came next. Whether we'd ever find our way back to each other, whether he could forgive me for my strength, or I could forgive him for his weakness. But I knew one thing. We both stood on the threshold of something new. And for the first time in many years, I wasn't afraid to step forward. I knew that beyond that threshold, life awaited me, my own life which I would surrender to no one ever again.